The Monster Hunter games have been a very popular niche as a franchise for a long time now. By niche I mean that it had its own community and rarely reached outside of that, even though the community was quite big in of itself. I could always understand the allure of these games, and as a concept of using weapons as big if not bigger than yourself to slay mighty monster and great beasts. But gameplay wise, I was always adverse to even trying these games. For the longest time I've been, and still am, a big fan of Dark Souls games, along with related titles. The gameplay of these games always felt like they had a nice flow to the combat, and although there were some degrees of animation locks, it lends itself well to the momentum of the fights. Because of this, I had this preconceived notion of how action combat should be and feel like. Monster Hunter, from what I had observed, did not fit into that category. It looked very clunky and slow, like the monster could move so smoothly but the player could barely move at all. Like, if you make one attack and then pray to God the monster doesn't try to attack you back, because you're gonna be standing there for a couple seconds. Then Monster Hunter Wilds was released. Yes, I am willing to admit, coming into this franchise only now with Monster Hunter Wilds and talking about Monster Hunter as a whole is a bit of a tourist move, but at the same time I think it is an interesting perspective to compare why the older games seem to put me off and this latest one drew me in so much. From a casual Monster Hunter player's point of view, I think the first thing that drew me to it, besides its beautiful visuals, was the fact that so many people online were excited about it. Now, I'm not someone who plays games based on popularity, but the fact that this game had reached the mainstream and not just its established audience made me think that this one's gonna be something special. So at the very least I thought, alright, you know what, let's give this one a try. Although I liked the concept of hunting down giant monsters and the combat gameplay around such a concept, I always felt like the Monster Hunter seemed to have a lack of purpose for progression. Mind you, without having actually played the game, so I didn't really know what I didn't know, but the game looked to me like you just progressed to get better gear, to progress some more, and there was never really an end goal. Felt a little bit grindy. I'm also someone who is quite into games with a storyline to follow to motivate me to progress and find out more about the world, characters, the main scenario. What Monster Hunter Wilds did for me was lure me in with a promise of a main storyline. A reason to progress outside of grinding, to get stronger, and had a seemingly better flow and seamless combat interaction than what I had seen from previous Monster Hunter trailers and gameplay. When playing Monster Hunter Wilds, I found that although there were some lovable characters, the story wasn't really anything impressive, honestly. And it was more of a way to give bare minimum reason to hunt the next monster. But that didn't bother me. In fact, I even started to dislike that there was a story because I just wanted to go to the gameplay and hunt monsters. I think focusing on the fact that there was a proper story with some gameplay in the trailer was a smart choice rather than focusing on only the gameplay like in previous games. I also think having a trailer with like epic moments and cinema-like scenes is very effective too. The veterans might just want the gameplay because they know that the game is good and they just want to know how much better or maybe worse the new games are from, you know, the former ones. But to someone new to Monster Hunter and to the average Joe and Jodette, they need the shiny to get lured in. I am one of those people. I was lured in by the shiny bait of things I like in games, and through that I got to experience the actual gameplay, which is what made me love the game and made me keep playing. I can't speak for whether this Monster Hunter is better, worse, or the same as the old ones, but I can speak on how Monster Hunter Wilds was like to me. The combat was so fun and engaging, and although I did feel some of the clunkiness from the movement and attacks, I quickly realized that it wasn't clunky at all, really. It was kind of part of the design, because this design, every movement you made, your positioning and timing, it all mattered to a degree I haven't felt from any other game really. I remember the first time I faced a Rei Dao and god Damn, that was a sick and cool fight. This mother effer has a freaking railgun on his head. But either way, it was a real David versus Goliath moment where you're trying to outsmart the monster and position yourself in a place where he does a specific attack and you're ready to dodge. You also attack in a way where if you need to dodge, you can. The precision decision making that can go into a fight like that to avoid getting hit while also hitting the monster in a weak spot, then prepare for the next movement to counterplay through focus striking a wound or using a counter blow at just the right time. It's all just epic. What Monster Hunter Wilds did was make the story-based hunts easy enough where anyone could feel cool going up against these behemoths despite not knowing all the combos and mechanics, while also making the combat so deep and detailed that a true gamer or veteran can use their knowledge and skill to feel like an absolute badass while probably never getting hit or countering every blow. I guess you could also just spam Dragon Piercer, but you know, there are two types of players, I guess. I also felt like the storyline they made helped make the progression of a new player much easier and more seamless to kind of help them learn the mechanics, learn how the player could use the weapons and craft armor, how they should face the monsters. They just had a very good new player introduction. Even Souls games where timing and positioning is of utmost importance doesn't quite give the same feeling of depth to reading your opponent's movements and responding in kind. The mechanics of the different weapons and how they can be used put together with the monsters and their detailed animations and behavior is just phenomenal. The more I played, the less clunky the game felt. It takes some getting used to, but once you get the hang of it, there is nothing quite like, perfect timing a counter simultaneously as you knock the monster down and can follow up with a combo of strikes or a single heavy blow. Or just focus strike a wound with let's say dual blades and just go absolutely Captain Levi and shred their ass. Pretty cool. Something that is new to Monster Hunter Wilds from the previous games from my understanding is the wound focus system. I've seen some people talk about how they dislike it because it makes the game maybe a little too easy, or for them at least, or the guaranteed flinch when popping a wound feels like a broken mechanic. But as a new and casual player, I love it. I think the wound system arguably brings even more depth to the combat. Because to apply wounds, you have to focus the same area multiple times to make it appear, and then being rewarded for that precision is a real feel-good moment. Plus, for certain weapons like I mentioned earlier, dual blades, popping a wound and going Beyblade mode feels cool as hell. It also makes sense that if you strike an enemy, they would get wounded. In the same way the monster's behavior and looks change based on their health, I think it makes perfect sense that if you strike the same area enough times, that part would show wear and tear. It's the same as breaking off parts when enough damage has been dealt, but on a smaller scale. I completely understand that such a mechanic can feel like it trivializes certain aspects of the game, and definitely to veterans, this is something that could be used to great advantage, but I think that's kinda also why it's so great. It is a mechanic that is easy to understand and use for newer or less talented players, making the game fun and cool for them to play, while also giving veterans a mechanic to take advantage of for higher end monster hunts. In the current patch, maybe the game is a bit too easy for veterans to make the mechanic feel good enough, but I'm sure once stronger versions of monsters or stronger monsters in general are released using this mechanic together with other established combos will feel great. The design of Monster Hunter Wilds feels quite ingenious in how they know what their core gameplay is. They hammer down on that core gameplay and make sure it is as fun and engaging as possible. Even the new wound system itself is giving players more interactions and combat options with the monsters, which I think this game is all about. Also, sometimes not everything has to be elitist and super hard. Sometimes you can add a mechanic that just enhances the rule of cool for the core gameplay, for the most amount of players, that is. I think this is also why Monster Hunter reached the mainstream. This feels like the Elden Ring of Monster Hunter, and maybe some will dislike that comparison, but I don't mean like gameplay wise necessarily. I just mean in how they went from Dark Souls, although popular, was very much a niche game, well known for its difficulty, although that is arguable. Then From Software released Elden Ring. This is where speculation on my part based on what I've observed, but what I believe brought Elden Ring to the mainstream is the way they designed difficulty. Having mediocre gameplay, or sometimes even good gameplay, but having like a difficulty setting where you go from easy, medium, hard, nightmare. Like, yeah, for old games I understand where certain things were limiting, but now like that kind of difficulty really just makes people feel like a loser if they play on anything but hard. And at the same time, most of that different difficulty is just more damage and more health. And like that's not fun or engaging at all. Previous Souls games were very linear, and it was either get good or uninstall the game. You could overlevel to some degree, but in the end, to get better weapons or upgrades, you needed to get past certain gatekeepers to progress. This put off many casual gamers to use their precious time on a game that gave them such an ultimatum. What Elden Ring did, on the other hand, was not to change the gameplay or even the difficulty in of itself. They stuck to the core of their game still, but they opened up the world, and as well as open up more player choices. I think the best way to deal with difficulty in games is to give the player as much freedom and customization as possible. Let people be creative. Is a boss too hard? Guess what? You can skip it and go to the next area through discovering a different path, or you can make a build specifically suited to deal with this boss's special mechanics. Is the game a little too easy? Why not play the game with a weaker weapon or no summons? Maybe you could do it no hit or death runs. Design the game to where the player can challenge themselves, but also to where the game can become easier through players' interaction with the game mechanics. As long as the game is fun to play on a mechanical level, I'm sure a lot of people would want to play in a more difficult way, because it feels good to overcome such challenges. But at the same time, it also brings everybody to the same standard. Because if you beat the boss, if you beat Malenia, if you beat the DLC Radahn, like you beat them, and you're on the same level. Maybe someone beat it better, maybe someone did a no hit or no death challenge and they just, or maybe did a one shot build and one shot at that. Doesn't matter, you all beat the same boss. And that brings the community together as well in a way. I believe Monster Hunter Wilds did a similar thing, but in a different way. They made well-designed difficulty, and that's the point. And because of this, the franchise reached the broader masses. The wound system is one aspect of this. Adding in a mechanic that helps out the little guy, giving more options in combat and making it easier to feel awesome is great for casual players. The variety in builds the game brings with all the different weapons and different playstyles they bring, the skills you can add with armor and decoration to focus on breaking off parts or opening wounds, or maybe make a crit build or elemental build. The fact that the game is more open world and you can go between the different zones to hunt monsters to farm for better gear, or specific gear that is good against the one you're having difficulty with. You can choose to bring in friends for support in hunts or play alone and make it more challenging. The game lends itself to speedrun or no-hit hunts for the absolute gamers out there. For me personally, I was adverse to the clunky nature of the player movement, but I could just use a weapon with greater mobility like the dual blades, and already the game started to feel great to play. As mentioned earlier, I also believe introducing the game with a more focus on the story brings more new people in. That feels the same to what Elden Ring did as well. Although the story has always been more environmental or lore based in Dark Souls, Elden Ring made their story more apparent to the average player, just about enough to lure them into the wonderful gameplay. Monster Hunter Wilds did the same. I mean, that is why I tried the game. Now, a lot of this already existed before in previous Monster Hunter, I believe at least, when it comes to the different weapons and the builds you can make and stuff like that. But looking at the old gameplay and comparing it to what I experienced in Wilds, it just feels like they improved upon everything as well as designed the difficulty in a more dynamic way. The best way to design difficulty in games, as I mentioned, is to make the game challenging by default and add in a lot of player choices and customization to potentially make the game easier. One way of doing this is opening up the world, making it less linear, giving the player not just options on how to build their character, but options on how to progress the game. Even though the game is a little bit on rails for the tutorial part, afterwards in Monster Hunter Wilds you do have a lot of options of going back and forth to different zones and refighting a lot of the monsters and even discovering new monsters on your own. Finally, I believe that streamers had an impact to a degree. For Monster Hunter Wilds, a lot of streamers with a big community who didn't really play Monster Hunter or only very recently started playing it were sponsored to play or started playing because they had friends who were fans of the series, and that introduced it to a bunch of new audiences. In other words, my feelings on this franchise have completely changed. First, I had concluded that this game simply wasn't for me, but now it's probably in my top 10 games. Maybe even squeezing its way into number 5, who knows? Though only if they fix the performance issues. I mean, goddamn, the optimizations are so bad. The game is great, but man, is it a lag and glitch fest at times. Hopefully with the next patch, it's all good. Monster Hunter is getting a free new update. I think by the time I upload this video, it's going to be either tomorrow or today. It depends on when I finish it. However, I will absolutely play when this update is available. The new Zogia, hope I pronounced that right, gear looks so freaking cool. I can't wait. So I will be streaming on Twitch, link in the description. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this was an interesting and insightful video from the perspective of a new player to this wonderful franchise. I'm sure the older games are just as fun and amazing, but as the puppy dog I am, I need a little treat to lure me in. And Monster Hunter Wilds gave me my Scooby snacks. For anyone who felt the way I felt, or for any other reason feel a bit conflicted towards Monster Hunter, I'm telling you, play Monster Hunter Wild. It's amazing. Or rather, if you're considering playing a Monster Hunter game, now's the time. And it's wild. Like, comment, subscribe for more content. Thank you, goodbye.